Hi, you're watching 13th Whisper. The line between truth and terror is thinner than you think, and today we're going to cross it. Subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and share it with your friends. Some stories don't like being told. Let's begin. The fog en route. Some roads take you where you're going, and some roads take you where you'll never come back from. This is the story of a truck driver on a lonely highway in Oregon who drove into a fog that wasn't just weather, it was a trap, a living nightmare that knew her name, her pain, and her past. Let's dive into the chilling nightmare of the fog on Route 9. Lindsay Morgan had been driving trucks for 8 years, ever since she turned 24. And decided she needed to get out of her small hometown in Idaho, a place where the only future was working at the local diner or the sawmill, neither of which she could stomach, not after everything she'd been through. At 32, she was a pro, hauling cargo across the Pacific Northwest, from Washington to California, through rain, snow, and the occasional landslide that made her late for a delivery. Her hands steady on the wheel, her mind focused on the road ahead, the only place she felt she could outrun her past. She loved the solitude of the road, the hum of her rig's engine, the way the world shrank to just her, the highway, and the country music crackling through her radio. Songs that reminded her of simpler times, before everything fell apart. Her truck, a beat-up Freightliner she'd nicknamed Betsy, was her home away from home. With a sleeping cab in the back where she'd spent countless nights, a coffee maker duct taped to the dash, its cord fraying but still working, and a photo of her brother, Caleb, taped to the visor. His smile frozen in time from before the accident that took him 5 years ago. A smile that broke her heart every time she looked at it. Caleb had been her best friend, her only real family after their mom, Ellen, passed from cancer a year before his crash. A slow, painful death that left Lindsay holding her hand in a hospice room, the beeping of machines the only sound besides her mom's ragged breaths. Her last words, a whispered, "I love you," that Lindsay still heard in her dreams. Losing them both had left a hole in Lindsay that she filled with miles, one delivery at a time. The road her escape, her punishment, her way of keeping the guilt at bay, the guilt of surviving when they didn't, the guilt of not being there for Caleb that night, of not picking up the phone when he called, of not being enough for her mom in those final days. She'd been on the road the night Caleb died, hauling a load through a storm, her phone on silent, and by the time she got the message, he was gone, his car found at the bottom of a ravine, the bridge he'd been crossing slick with rain, his body cold when they pulled him out. She blamed herself every day, wondering if she could have saved him, if she just answered, if she'd just been there. And the fog that night, the fog he'd driven into, became a symbol of her failure, a ghost that haunted her every time the weather turned. It was a Thursday night in late October, the air crisp with the promise of winter. The sky a deep black dotted with stars that seemed too bright, too cold. When Lindsay took a load of lumber down Route 9, a stretch of highway in Oregon that wound through dense pine forests, the kind of place where you could drive for hours and not see another soul, the trees looming like silent sentinels, their branches clawing at the sky. Route 9 was known among truckers for being a shortcut, cutting a good 2 hours off the trip to Portland if you didn't mind the narrow lanes, the sharp curves, and the lack of cell service. A dead zone where your phone was just a brick in your pocket, useless if you got into trouble. But it was also known for something else. Stories of drivers who'd gone missing, their trucks found abandoned on the side of the road, their CB radios still crackling with static, as if they just stepped out for a smoke and never came back. Their trailers untouched, their logs still strapped down, their lives erased without a trace. Lindsay had heard the stories, whispered over coffee at truck stops, tales of a fog that rolled in out of nowhere. A fog so thick you couldn't see your own hand in front of your face. A fog that made you hear things, see things. Things that couldn't be real. Things that knew your name, your fears, your regrets. She'd always laughed them off, chalking it up to tired drivers, too much caffeine, and the kind of loneliness that makes your mind play tricks. But as she turned onto Route 9 that night, the sky clear and the stars sharp above, she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. A feeling that made her grip the steering wheel a little tighter. Her eyes scanning the road ahead. Her heart beating just a little faster than it should. The first hour was uneventful, the highway stretching out like a black ribbon through the trees, her headlights cutting through the darkness, the radio playing an old Johnny Cash song, Ring of Fire. The lyrics a haunting backdrop to the empty road. The kind of song that made you feel like you were the last person on Earth. She was halfway through her route, sipping on her third cup of coffee, the bitter taste keeping her awake, her eyes heavy from a long day, when she noticed it. A faint mist creeping across the road, curling around the pines like ghostly fingers. The kind of mist you'd expect on a cold night in Oregon. Nothing to worry about, just a natural part of the landscape. But as she drove deeper into it, the mist thickened, turning into a fog so dense her headlights bounced off it, creating a wall of white that swallowed the road, the trees, the sky, everything, leaving her in a void where the only sound was the rumble of Betsy's engine and her own shallow breathing. She slowed Betsy to a crawl, her speedometer dropping to 20 miles an hour, her hands tight on the wheel, her knuckles white, her eyes straining to see the yellow line in the center of the road, the only thing keeping her from veering into the ditch, her heart pounding in her chest, a steady thump that matched the rhythm of the engine. Come on, she muttered, flipping on her fog lights. But they did little to help. The beams scattering in the haze, making it harder to see, not easier. The light reflecting back at her like a mirror, blinding her with its own glow. The radio crackled, Johnny Cash's voice cutting out mid-verse, replaced by static that hissed like a snake, the sound grating on her nerves, making her skin crawl. A sound that felt alive, malicious, like it was trying to speak. She reached for the dial, her fingers trembling, trying to find another station. But the static only grew louder, a wall of noise that filled the cab. And then she heard it, a voice, faint but unmistakable, cutting through the noise like a knife. Lindsay. She froze, her hand on the dial, her heart slamming against her ribs, the coffee cup slipping from her other hand, spilling across the floor of the cab. The bitter smell filling the air, mixing with the scent of fear. Her fear, sharp and metallic. "What the hell?" she whispered, her voice trembling, her eyes darting to the radio. But the voice came again, clearer this time. A voice she hadn't heard in 5 years. A voice that belonged to her brother, Caleb. A voice that should have been impossible. "Lindsay, stop the truck." She slammed on the brakes, Betsy lurching to a stop with a groan, the engine idling, the fog pressing against the windows like a living thing, thick and heavy. The kind of fog that felt like it could suffocate you if you breathed too deep, its weight pressing down on her, making her chest tight. "Caleb," she said, her voice barely a whisper, her hands shaking as she reached for the photo on the visor, his face smiling back at her, his eyes bright with the life he'd lost when his car went off a bridge in a storm. The same kind of night as this, the same kind of fog, a night she'd never forgiven herself for. No, no, no. This isn't real, she told herself, her voice rising, her breath fogging the air inside the cab. the temperature dropping so fast she could feel the cold seeping through her jacket into her bones, her fingers numbing as she gripped the wheel. She grabbed the CB radio, her fingers fumbling with the mic, her voice cracking as she spoke, her words tumbling out in a rush. "This is Lindsay Morgan on Route 9. Anyone out there? I need help. I'm stuck in some kind of fog. I'm hearing things. Please, someone answer me." But the CB was silent. No response. Just more static. A wall of noise that seemed to mock her. And then Caleb's voice again. Not from the radio this time, but from outside. Right outside her window. Soft and pleading. "Lindsay, come to me." She turned her head, her breath catching in her throat, her eyes wide with terror. And there he was, standing on the side of the road, illuminated by her fog lights. His figure pale and ghostly in the haze, his face just as she remembered it. But wrong. So wrong. His eyes empty. Black voids where his warm brown eyes should have been. His skin too pale, almost translucent. His smile too wide, showing teeth that were too sharp, too many. A smile that wasn't his, that wasn't human. "Caleb," she whispered, her voice breaking, tears stinging her eyes, her hand reaching for the door handle, her heart screaming at her to go to him, to hold him, to tell him she was sorry for not being there that night, for not saving him, for not being the sister he deserved. But her mind, the part of her that had survived 8 years on the road, the part that had learned to trust her instincts, screamed louder, telling her to stay in the truck, to keep the doors locked, to drive, to get the hell out of there. Because whatever that thing was, it wasn't her brother. It couldn't be. She pulled her hand back, her fingers trembling, her eyes locked on the figure. And that's when she saw another shape in the fog, smaller, frailer. A woman in a hospital gown, her hair thin and gray, her face gaunt but unmistakable. Her mother, Ellen, who died in a hospice bed, her hand in Lindsay's, her body wasted by cancer. Her last moments a quiet surrender to the inevitable. "Mom?" Lindsay choked out, her voice a sob, her chest tight with grief, with guilt, with the weight of all the things she'd never said, all the things she'd never done, the nights she'd spent on the road instead of at her mom's bedside, the calls she'd ignored because she couldn't face the truth. The figures stood there, silent, staring, their eyes glowing faintly in the fog, their smiles stretching wider, unnatural, grotesque. And then they spoke, their voices overlapping, a chorus of the dead that sent a shiver down her spine. "Lindsay, stop the truck. Join us." She screamed, a raw primal sound that tore from her throat, her foot slamming on the gas, Betsy roaring to life, the tires screeching as she pulled back onto the road, the figures disappearing into the fog, but their voices followed her, echoing through the cab, through her mind, through her soul. "You can't leave us. You belong with us." She drove faster, her speedometer climbing, 30, 40, 50 miles an hour. The fog so thick she couldn't see the road, couldn't see anything. But she didn't care. She just needed to get out, to escape, to leave the voices behind. Her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst, her hands slick with sweat on the wheel. The radio crackled again, the static louder, a wall of noise that seemed to press against her. And then a new voice. Not Caleb's, not her mom's, but her own. A perfect copy of her voice. Speaking words she'd never said, words she'd thought 1,000 times but never dared to. "Speak. I should have died with them. I don't deserve to live." She slammed her fist against the radio, the plastic cracking under the force, the static cutting off with a sharp pop. But the voices were in her head now, whispering, taunting, pulling at the guilt she'd carried for years. The guilt of surviving when they didn't. The guilt of moving on when they couldn't. The guilt of living a life they'd never get to have. She saw more figures in the fog, lining the road now. Dozens of them, pale and silent, their faces familiar. Friends she'd lost over the years, truckers she'd known who died on the road. Their rigs flipped, their bodies broken, all of them staring, all of them calling her name, their voices a chorus of despair that filled the cab, filled her mind. Lindsay, stop. Stay. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face, her hands gripping the wheel so tight her knuckles turned white. Her voice a desperate scream that echoed in the cab. Leave me alone. You're not real. You're not them. But the fog wouldn't let her go. The voices wouldn't stop. And then she saw it. A sign on the side of the road, rusted and faded, barely visible in the haze. But the words were clear, etched into the metal like a warning. Route 9 Memorial, in memory of those lost. Underneath were names, dozens of them. Names of drivers, names of the missing, names of the dead. And, at the bottom, 2 names that made her blood run cold. 2 names that shouldn't be there, couldn't be there. Caleb Morgan, Ellen Morgan. No, she whispered, her voice trembling, her eyes darting to the photo on the visor, to the faces in the fog, to the sign that defied reality. Because Caleb had died in Idaho, not Oregon, and her mom had never been on this road, had never left the hospice bed where she'd taken her last breath. The fog thickened. The voices grew louder, a cacophony of whispers and screams. And then she felt it. A pull, like invisible hands on the wheel, trying to turn the truck, trying to force her off the road, into the trees, into the darkness where the figures waited, their hands outstretched, their eyes glowing, their smiles hungry. She fought it, her arms straining, her muscles burning, her foot on the gas, her voice a raw scream that tore from her throat. I'm not stopping. You can't have me. I won't let you take me. But the pull was stronger, the voices deafening, a chorus of the dead that drowned out her screams. And then she remembered something. A story she'd heard at a truck stop years ago. A driver who'd made it out of the fog on Route 9. A grizzled old man with a 1,000-yard stare, who'd said the only way to escape was to face the guilt, to let it go, to keep driving no matter what you saw, what you heard, to accept the past, and move forward, because the fog fed on regret, on sorrow, on the things you couldn't change. She closed her eyes, her hands steady on the wheel, her voice a whisper through the tears. A confession, a release. I'm sorry, Caleb. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I should have answered the phone. I should have been better. I'm sorry, Mom. I should have stayed with you. I should have been there more. I love you both. I'll always love you. But I have to live. I have to keep going. For you. The voices screamed, a sound that made her ears bleed. A sound that felt like it was tearing her apart, the truck shaking as the fog pressed harder. The figures reaching for her, their hands clawing at the windows, their nails scraping against the glass, leaving trails of frost, their faces twisted with rage, with hunger, with despair, their eyes glowing brighter, their mouths open in silent screams. But she kept driving, her eyes closed, her heart pounding, her hands steady, the miles ticking by, the fog thinning, the voices fading, the cold retreating, the pull on the wheel weakening, until she felt the truck break free, the air clearing, the stars visible again, the road stretching out ahead, empty and silent, the trees no longer looming, the night no longer a threat. She opened her eyes, her breath ragged, her hands trembling. The photo of Caleb still on the visor, his smile unchanged. The fog gone. The voices gone. The figures gone. The highway stretching out before her. A lifeline. A second chance. She pulled over, her body shaking, her face wet with tears. Her voice a broken whisper as she clutched the photo, her fingers tracing Caleb's face. I made it. I made it. I'm so sorry. I'll live for you. I promise. But as she looked in the rearview mirror, she saw it. A faint mist on the horizon, creeping closer. A whisper of fog that shouldn't be there. And in the distance, a single figure, pale and silent, standing in the middle of the road, watching her, waiting. Its eyes glowing faintly, its smile, a promise of return. She drove on, her foot on the gas, her eyes on the road, knowing she'd escaped the fog on Route 9, but not sure if it had truly let her go. Not sure if it ever would. The whisper of her name still lingering in. That's all for now. Thanks for listening, all the way to the end. If you enjoyed these stories, leave a like, subscribe, and share this with someone who still thinks horror is just fiction. The scariest things happen when you think it's all over. I'll see you very soon. And don't forget, check under the bed before you sleep.